The earth shook beneath massive steps as the valley fell silent. Herds of hadrosaurs froze, their heads lifted high, their bodies trembling with ancient fear. The air carried the scent of dominance, sharp and heavy. From a shadow of towering trees, a giant emerged, its eyes cold, its teeth gleaming in fading light. Tyrannosaurus rex moved with terrible patience, each stride echoing through the ground. It did not chase, it did not rush, for hunger had already spread panic among the herd. In that stillness the world waited, and the strike of the king was only moments away. The valley stretched wide beneath the glare of a summer sun. Heat shimmered across the plains, while dragonflies skimmed low over shallow pools. Tall conifers reached high above the marshes, and the ground was thick with ferns that brushed against the legs of passing herds. The air carried the smell of water and soil heavy with life. Every sound carried far in the stillness. The bellow of a distant triceratops rolled like thunder, and the calls of hadrosaurs echoed across the plain. This land belonged to giants. Across the riverbanks, herds moved like living tides. Hadrosaurs dipped their heads to feed on low plants and splashed in the shallows. Triceratops gathered near groves of cycads, their horns sharp, their bodies massive and unshaken. Smaller predators skirted the edges, waiting for scraps or moments of weakness. Yet above all these creatures, one ruler walked unseen, yet always present. Tyrannosaurus rex. The predator was not a shadow of myth, but a force of flesh and bone. Its body stretched 40 feet from snout to tail and stood tall above the brush. Its head was heavy with bone, its jaws lined with teeth thick as daggers. Eyes sharp and forward, gave the gaze of a hunter who measured distance and motion with perfect accuracy. Each step it placed pressed deep into the soil, leaving tracks that held water long after rain. The ground remembered its passing. The predator hunted with patience. It did not need to rush, for its body was built to finish what it started. The massive skull could crush bone with a single bite. Its tail swept for balance as it moved through trees or over open plain. Muscles coiled beneath a hide scored with old scars. Each scar was a memory of battle survived. Rivals had tested it, and prey had fought back, yet the giant endured. Endurance was its greatest weapon. The herd sensed its presence even when they did not see it. Hadrosaurs raised their heads, often their eyes wide, and ears tuned to the silence of forest edge. Triceratops placed themselves in a line, horns outward, whenever shadows thickened near the trees. Even when Tyrannosaurus did not strike, fear alone moved the herds. The cycle of survival was shaped by its unseen steps. One afternoon, the predator stood at the edge of the forest, watching the river plain. Heat drifted in waves over ground, and insects buzzed thick in the air. Across the water, a herd of hadrosaurs fed. Their tails swayed as they chewed on ferns. Calves pressed close to their mothers. The river sparkled with sunlight, yet tension lay over the herd like a veil. They knew the silence that meant danger. Tyrannosaurus lowered its head to taste the air. The scent of prey was strong, yet hunger did not force it forward. It had learned patience from many seasons. It did not waste strength on chances that might fail. Instead, it stood motionless as shadows stretched. Only its eyes moved, following the herd across the plain. A gust of wind carried another scent, faint yet unmistakable. The smell of another predator. A musk heavy and sharp like its own, but not the same. For a moment the giant stilled. Its eyes narrowed and its chest lifted with a deep breath. Somewhere beyond the forest, another of its kind moved. This was not new. Rivals passed through these lands from time to time, drawn by herds and water. Most did not stay long, for territory was never shared. Yet each sign mattered. Tracks pressed into mud-claw marks on a fallen tree, the echo of a roar carried by wind. Each was a reminder that survival meant more than hunting prey. It also meant holding ground. The sun dropped lower, casting gold across the river. Tyrannosaurus stepped forward, its weight cracking fallen branches. The herds reacted at once. The hadrosaurs lifted their heads and pushed into the water, splashing frantically to reach the far bank. Triceratops turned in formation, their horns glinting like spears. The plain shook with motion as life scrambled to escape the shadow of the king. Yet the predator did not pursue. It watched the chaos without moving faster than a slow stride. Its hunger could wait. Tonight, it would not waste strength in shallow water. The herd would calm by dawn and paths would open. It turned from the river, slipping back into the forest. Branches rustled and still behind it. The plain grew quiet again, though tension remained in every creature that had seen the giant pass. Night came quickly in the valley. Stars burned above the dark forest, and the calls of smaller hunters echoed in the distance. Tyrannosaurus lay beneath a fallen pine, its chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Its eyes closed, yet its senses did not sleep. Every vibration of the ground, every scent in the air passed through its awareness. The rival scent was faint but real. Somewhere out there, another set of jaws, another roar waited. The land had always been shaped by such rulers. Giants rose and fell with time. Battles carved scars into both flesh and earth. Yet in this moment, one truth stood clear. The valley belonged to Tyrannosaurus rex. Its breath misted in the cool night air, and its body filled the hollow with the weight of survival. Tomorrow would bring another hunt, another clash, another test. The forest whispered with wind, and the river carried silver under moonlight. Herds shifted uneasily in the dark. Their ears caught the faint rustle of leaves where the predator lay. They did not sleep deeply, for they lived under its watch. The balance of life was held by its hunger, by its patience, by its roar that would soon split the night once more. The king of the valley rested, but the story of its rule had only begun. The dawn broke with pale light stretching across the valley. Mist clung to the river like smoke, and dew coated the leaves of cycads and ferns. The world stirred slowly. Hadrosaurs pushed out of the forest into the open plain to feed. Their calls rose in the cool air and echoed through the cliffs. Across the distance, Triceratops gathered in slow rhythm, their horns outlined in the early glow. Tyrannosaurus stood near the riverbank. Hunger gnawed in its chest. It had not fed in days. The muscles along its legs ached from restless patrols, and the hollow of its stomach urged action. Yet patience guided its steps. The predator knew that haste often led to waste. A single failure could cost more strength than the reward offered. It scanned the plain where hadrosaurs gathered close. The giant lowered itself into shadow where fallen trees lay across the bank. The mist curled around its legs, hiding the outline of its form. The herd fed with tails swaying. One young calf strayed near the water and bent its neck to drink. The predator's gaze fixed on the small figure. Muscles coiled in silence. The river hummed with insects and frogs. A branch cracked under the predator's weight. The sound cut through the morning. Heads shot upward in unison. The herd froze for a breath, then panic spread like fire. Hadrosaurs bolted splashing into the shallows. Their tails lashed water high into the air. The calf bleated loud and ran with the herd. Tyrannosaurus surged forward in a single thunderous stride, yet the prey had already reached the deeper water. The river churned with the pounding of bodies. The predator halted at the bank. Water sprayed across its face, and ripples shook the surface. Hunger surged with frustration. It roared once, a sound that split the valley and sent birds rising in black clouds. The herd vanished beyond the far bank, leaving silence broken only by the rush of current. Tyrannosaurus stood still, its jaws parted as breath steamed in the morning air. The hunt had failed and strength had been wasted. By midday, heat pressed heavy on the land. Insects filled the air, and every pool shimmered with sunlight. The predator wandered through tall grass where dragonflies rose in clouds. Its steps crushed ferns and left prints deep and wide. Hunger pulled hard, yet the chance of a large kill seemed slim. Smaller prey skittered among the brush. A young ornithopod darted across an open space. The predator's eyes fixed, and its body lunged with startling speed. Jaws snapped and bone cracked. The kill was small, but enough to keep life steady. Flesh tore with each bite. The predator's tongue tasted hot blood. Scavenger lizards crept close, but kept distance as the giant fed. When only scraps remained, they scuttled in to take what was left. Tyrannosaurus licked its teeth and lifted its head to the wind. The air carried new scents of rain to the west. Storm clouds gathered beyond the hills. The storm came with fury. Afternoon light dimmed under black clouds. Wind bent the trees until branches snapped and fell. Rain lashed the land in sheets. The river swelled in hours, surging across its banks and flooding the marshes. Herds fled to higher ground. Hadrosaurs splashed through mud, and Triceratops pressed uphill, their horns glistening with water. The valley became a roar of thunder and water. Tyrannosaurus struggled through the storm. Its massive frame cut through the torrent, yet each step sank deep into mud. Hunger raged as prey scattered beyond reach. Lightning split the sky, casting the predator in blinding light. For hours the storm raged until at last the clouds broke and the valley lay drenched in raw. Pools filled every low place and fallen trees marked the ground. When calm returned, the land had changed. Trails were washed away. The river carved new channels. Prey herds moved to higher ridges, avoiding the soaked plains. The predator adjusted. Hunger gave no choice. It followed tracks that led toward groves where Triceratops had gathered. Their scent hung thick in the wet air. Tyrannosaurus pushed through dripping brush and emerged on a slope. Below the slope, a Triceratops herd grazed on wet ferns. Their horns gleamed sharp, and their bodies moved in slow rhythm. The predator watched with careful stillness. It chose not the strongest, but a lone adult at the herd's edge. Scars lined its hide, and one horn bent slightly downward. Hunger demanded risk. Muscles tensed. The predator stepped down the slope with silence broken only by dripping leaves. The attack came sudden. Tyrannosaurus charged across mud to ground, quaking under its weight. The Triceratops turned with startling speed. Horns thrust forward, and a bellow ripped from its chest. The predator's jaws snapped, but teeth met shield of bone. Pain shot through its skull. It reeled back, yet pressed forward again. The two giants clashed with force that shook trees. The predator bit deep into the neck muscle, just behind the shield. Flesh tore and blood sprayed hot against its face. The Triceratops bellowed, thrashing with horns. One horn grazed the predator's leg, slicing hide and muscle. Pain burned, yet the jaws held firm. The struggle churned mud under their feet. Birds fled from trees as the clash raged. At last the Triceratops faltered. Its legs buckled, and its weight pulled it down. Tyrannosaurus released its hold and roared loud enough to shake the valley. The prey collapsed, bleeding into the mud. The predator stood over its fallen foe, chest heaving with exhaustion. Its leg throbbed with pain, yet victory stood beneath it. The feast began. Flesh tore and bone cracked. Hunger eased, though pain remained sharp. Scavengers gathered at the edges, waiting their turn. Hours passed until the carcass lay open and the predator lay heavy with meat. Yet the wound on its leg bled slow and steady. Each step brought ache. It limped toward a stand of trees to rest. Night fell quiet after the storm. Stars burned above the drenched valley. Tyrannosaurus lay in the hollow of a fallen tree, its breath steady but labored. The wound throbbed with heat. Each scar told a story, but this one ran fresh and deep. Insects buzzed at the edge of torn flesh. The predator licked the wound with slow patience. Survival demanded healing as much as victory. Through the silence, another sound came. A roar low and deep carried across the valley. It was not its own voice. The rival had returned. Tyrannosaurus lifted its head, eyes sharp in the dark. The scent of another drifted with the night, wind strong and close. Another of its kind walked these lands, drawn by prey and perhaps by challenge. The valley held its breath. The storm had changed more than rivers and trees. It had brought rivals closer. The hunger of Tyrannosaurus was not the only hunger here. The clash to come was written in every track pressed into wet soil, and every echo of a roar carried across the plain. The rising sun would not bring peace, but battle. The sun rose over the valley in a pale haze. Mist clung to the low ground while the river gleamed silver in the dawn light. Herds had moved uphill after the storm, yet the land still pulsed with tension. Birds circled high above in silence, as if waiting for something to break the stillness. Tyrannosaurus limped from the forest edge. Its leg wound burned, yet its body carried the strength of victory from the Triceratops' kill. Hunger had been eased, but another need pressed harder. The scent of a rival filled the air. Strong and sharp, too close to ignore. The valley was not large enough for two kings. Across the plain, another giant emerged. The rival stood tall with hide darker and scars crisscrossing its flank. Its chest swelled as it released a deep bellow that rolled like thunder. Birds burst from trees at the sound. The call carried challenge and claim. Tyrannosaurus answered with its own roar, louder and sharper, shaking the ground. The valley now had one question. Who would rule? They advanced slowly. Each step sank into soft earth, still heavy from rain. Their eyes locked with unblinking focus. Herds on distant ridges stilled as if stone. Even the river seemed to pause its flow. The rivals closed the distance until the air between them crackled with tension. Then the silence shattered. The first collision was brutal. Skull struck skull with a force that made the earth tremble. Jaws snapped with bone-crushing power, teeth scraping against thick hide. Tails lashed for balance. Dust and mud sprayed as they shoved against one another, each trying to drive the other down. Roars ripped the air louder than thunder. The rival clamped jaws onto Tyrannosaurus' shoulder, tearing deep. Flesh gave way under the bite, and blood streamed hot. Pain roared through the predator's body, yet it answered with a crushing bite to the rival's neck. Teeth sank and tore muscle. Both giants thrashed, locked in a storm of flesh and fury. They broke apart for breath, chests, heaving jaws dripping with blood. They circled in the mud, eyes never leaving each other. Each step was measured yet full of rage. Tyrannosaurus charged again, striking low. Its skull slammed against the rival's chest, knocking it sideways into shallow water. The splash sent ripples across the plain. The rival recovered fast, lunging forward with jaws wide. Teeth clamped on Tyrannosaurus' flank, tearing hide. The predator roared in agony. Its legs buckled for a moment, and it crashed into the water. The rival pressed weight down, trying to force it under. Water churned red with blood. For a breath, it seemed the king might fall. But Tyrannosaurus rolled with its massive tail, striking the rival across the ribs. The blow cracked with force and drove the rival off balance. With a surge, it rose again, water cascading from its hide. It lunged jaws, snapping closed on the rival's lower jaw. Bone cracked sharp, and the rival roared in pain, thrashing wildly. The two titans clashed again, and again, each strike carving new wounds. Blood painted the water and mud. Birds circled close to their wings, flashing in morning light, waiting for death. The sound of the battle carried across the valley. Smaller predators watched from the shadows, frozen by the storm of power before them. At last exhaustion began to show. Both giants heaved with breath, their legs trembling from strain. Tyrannosaurus bore deep gashes along its flank and shoulder. Blood matted its hide, yet its eyes still burned with fire. The rival staggered with broken jaw and ribs cracked by the tail strike, yet it still roared defiance. The final moment came swift. Tyrannosaurus fainted left, then swung right with sudden force. Its jaws clamped around the rival's neck just below the skull. Teeth sank deep into muscle and bone. The rival thrashed, but the grip held unbroken. With a wrenching twist, Tyrannosaurus tore through flesh. The rival collapsed with shudder, the roar dying in its throat. Silence followed. Only the river moved its surface, stained red. Tyrannosaurus stood above the fallen body, chest heaving, eyes blazing. Blood dripped from its jaws as it lifted its head to the sky. A roar burst forth, shaking the valley with raw power. It was a roar of dominance, a survival of unchallenged rule. The herd on the ridges scattered at the sound. Birds rose in black waves. Even the trees seemed to bend beneath the echo. The rival lay still in the mud, its body already drawing scavengers that crept from shadows. Tyrannosaurus remained standing tall, though blood poured from its wounds. Each scar was proof of its reign. The sun rose higher, burning mist away. The valley now had its ruler. One king remained. The valley fell into uneasy silence after the thunder of the battle. The body of the fallen rival lay heavy in the shallow water, its dark hide broken and still. Blood stained the current and drifted downriver, carrying the scent of death. Already scavengers crept closer. Carrion birds swooped down in cautious arcs. Smaller predators slunk from the edges of the forest, their eyes darting toward the prize, yet retreating at the first shift of movement from a victor. Tyrannosaurus stood tall, though its body trembled with exhaustion. Wounds marked its shoulder, flank, and leg. Deep gashes oozed blood that mingled with the mud beneath its massive feet. Pain burned with every breath, but it remained unbroken. Its eyes glowed with fire that no rival had managed to snuff out. Scars will remain, but so too would the story of dominance carved into its flesh. The roar it gave moments earlier still echoed faint across distant ridges. Herds had fled when the sound rose. Now they lingered at the edge of forests, wary, but unwilling to leave the valley fully. They knew this land was fertile and rich with water, Yet they also knew the valley was now the domain of a single ruler. To graze here was to live in the shadow of the king. Tyrannosaurus lowered its head to the body of a rival. The smell of blood was thick, almost overwhelming. It bit into the carcass, tearing free a great chunk of flesh. Warmth filled its jaws as it chewed and swallowed. The rival's strength now became fuel for the victor. Each bite restored some of the energy drained by the battle. It was a brutal cycle, but one written into the bones of the world. Hours passed as it fed. The sun climbed high above, burning away mist and drying the ground into cracked mud. Flies swarmed over wounds, buzzing in clouds around the rival's body. Tyrannosaurus moved slowly between feeding sessions, retreating to the shade of trees to rest before returning to the kill. Scavengers waited at a distance, eyes fixed on the carcass, yet no one dared challenge while the king still fed. Night came with cold winds, sweeping across the valley. Stars burned above with pale fire, while the moon glowed silver on the river's surface. Tyrannosaurus lay near the kill, breathing heavy. Its body shivered at times as pain rippled through wounds. Yet its spirit remained strong. Each scar was a mark of victory. Its reign had been tested, and its rule confirmed by blood. Days passed and the carcass decayed. Scavengers finally took their share when the king had eaten enough and wandered to the river for water. Its reflection stared back from the dark surface. Jaw-scarred eyes, sharp chest broad from battle. The reflection was not of weakness, but of survival. Every scar was proof that it had endured storms and challenges that would have ended others. The valley began to return to rhythm. Herds drifted back to graze by the river, their ears twitching at every sound. They moved cautiously, but necessity forced them to risk. The land was too fertile to abandon. They learned the pattern of the king. When Tyrannosaurus rested in the forest shadows, they grazed by the water. When it emerged, they scattered in panic, fleeing to higher ground. Balance returned, though balance was ruled by fear. One morning, clouds spread across the sky. Rain fell in steady sheets, soaking the earth until mud slicked the valley floor. Tyrannosaurus rose from its resting place and moved to the river. It drank deeply, ignoring the rain that washed over its hide. Each drop stung where wounds had not yet healed, yet the cleansing water soothed. The rain carried away dried blood, leaving scars stark against dark skin. It lifted its head and released a deep roar. The sound rose above the storm rolling across hills and forests. The message was clear. The king lived, the king ruled, the king endured. Smaller predators froze where they crouched. Herds scattered, though no hunt followed. The roar was not of hunger, but of declaration. Seasons shifted. The wounds healed, leaving ridges of scar tissue across its body. Its gait carried a limp from the leg wound, yet it did not hinder its hunts. If anything, it added to the aura of power. The valley learned the story of survival, not through whispers, but through every track left in the mud. Every carcass claimed every roar that shook the ridges. Tyrannosaurus became more than predator. It became presence. The river flowed, yet it flowed through its domain. The herds grazed, yet they grazed under its shadow. The rival had challenged, but the rival had fallen. Life continued, yet life bent around the will of the king. When the sun set behind the mountains and the valley burned with orange light, Tyrannosaurus would sometimes lift its head and watch, not with thought as humans would know, but with instinct deep and ancient. The valley was not just land. It was survival carved into earth and bone. And survival belonged to the strongest. The resolution of battle was not only death. It was the story that followed. The valley itself seemed to remember. Silence lingered longer at dusk. Herds paused more often to listen. The roar of the king echoed, not only in air, but in memory. The rival had fallen, but the lesson remained. The king had endured. The valley rested beneath the weight of time. Seasons turned green into gold and gold into dust, yet the rhythm of life remained the same. Herds moved across open plains, grazing by the river, before scattering at the faintest echo of power. Smaller predators hunted in shadows, but none dared linger when the scent of the king swept across the wind. Tyrannosaurus endured. Scars lined its hide, each one a mark of battles faced, and survived. The limp in its stride never left, yet it did not weaken the giant. Instead, it became a sign carved into the earth itself. When the king walked, the ground remembered. Birds scattered before it. Herds froze and fled. Silence followed in its path as though the land itself bowed. Night often brought stillness, but sometimes the valley shook with a roar that rolled across ridges and forests. It was not the roar of hunger alone. It was a sound of survival to call dominance. Even the stars seemed to flicker when it rose. Other predators cowered, and even the wind seemed to still until the echo faded. Generations of herds passed under the shadow of its reign. Calves grew into adults, always knowing the shape of terror on the horizon. They learned from the fear of their mothers to flee at the first scent. Balance was harsh yet unbroken. Life continued because death was certain. In time, the scars faded into the memory of the valley. Bones of rivals and prey lay scattered across the riverbed, each one telling fragments of the same story. The story of a king who would not fall, a predator that rose against storm's wounds and challengers, a beast that carved its rule into soil and sky alike. The sun sank one evening, painting the land in red fire. Tyrannosaurus stood tall on a ridge overlooking the valley, its form black against the blaze. Breath steamed in the cooling air, and its eyes burned with quiet fire. For a moment the valley seemed still, every creature pausing as though to listen. Then the roar came, deep, unbroken, eternal. The valley trembled and remembered. The king lived. The king ruled. The king would endure until time itself grew silent.